Did you know that 4 cultivars, Shiraz, Grenache, Cinsault and Tinta Barocca, are fast becoming inextricably linked to the Swartland region in South Africa as a sort of signature red blend to this now rather famous region? For many producers in the Swartland, Syrah, as a kind of central player in the Swartland's rise to prominence, means that this cultivar still forms the backbone or center of many Swartland Red blends. But the other 3 cultivars, Grenache, Cinsault and Tinta Barocca, are particularly well suited to really hot, dry regions in a way that Syrah definitely is not. And so that fact alone means that these 3 cultivars are very exciting prospects for the more climate conscious or progressively minded winemakers and viticulturalists within the Swartland. At this point you may protest, well, in the Southern Rhone, Syrah and Grenache and Cinsault are readily blended. There's nothing unique about that, which is true. But in the Swartland there's also been a long association with Portuguese cultivars like Tinta Barocca and Touriga Nacional. And so the grouping of these cultivars has formed a globally unique little scenario and created a distinctive flavor profile that is becoming renowned as a Swartland Red Blend. Now, if you have yet to explore this particular style of wine, what I'm going to do is list a few red blends from the Swartland for you to track down. Now, please note, I have deliberately avoided listing ridiculous unicorn wines that you won't be able to find, like Eben Sardi's Columella, for example. What I tried to do is list a few wines that should be readily available at your local specialist store. Now, off the top of the list, I would probably start with the A.A. Badenhorst Family Reserve Red, but then you also have Andre Brain's City on a Hill wine range, which is worth hunting down. Then you've got relative newcomer Tim Hillock, who makes a red blend called Rooi, which means red in Afrikaans, and that actually gets fruit partially from the Paardeberg and partially from the Kastielberg. And of course we have an absolute classic, which is the Radford-Dale Black Rock, which gets a lot of its fruit grapes like Mourvèdre and Carignan down from a kind of Abbotsdale south of Malmesbury, but then it gets a lot of its Syrah from the Paardeberg as well. And finally on the list is today's hand drink solo wine of the day, which is the Swerwer Red Blend 2021, made by winemaker Jasper Wickens. Now, the word Swerwer, according to Jasper Wickens, is something that describes the shape of the lifestyle of a young South African winemaker who's constantly heading off around the globe, chasing these mystical and magical harvests in delightfully exotic wine regions. Jasper, returning to South Africa, started his project called Swerwer in 2012. His winemaking adheres fairly stringently to the limitations laid out by the independent Swartland producers and their manifesto. Now, their manifesto prohibits the addition of acid or the addition of tannins or the addition of fining agents. In fact, it pretty much prohibits the addition of anything. It also only allows spontaneous or native ferments, and they generally avoid new oak as any sort of maturation vessel. Of course, that is the manifesto. There have been a couple of really troublesome vintages recently, and whether all of them adhere to that 100% is really hard to know, because it's very difficult to make wines like that in that region. But that is what the manifesto says. No acid, no tannins, no fining agents, only native yeast, no new oak, and other things as well. Jasper, for his part, makes some truly crazy wines under the Swerwer label. The one off the top of the head that jumps out to me is his Rooi Groen Semillon, which means the red-green Semillon. And it's called as such because it's made from the copper color Semillon Gris, which is a mutation of Semillon unique to South Africa. If the headlines are to be believed, the Mullinots, also from the Swartland, have registered the entire planet's very first dedicated Semillon Gris vineyard. And so Jasper's Rooi Groen Semillon Gris smells of wonderful things like peaches and wildflowers and ginger. It's delightfully bizarre. And yet, for all Jasper's ability to hang on to the revolutionary wine fringe, today's wine is really particularly impressive for just how clean and classic and precise it is, and for what a great example it is of the emerging Swartland Red Blend category. Okay, so when we get into the glass and give this guy a sniff, well, the nose does start out initially a little shy, but it opens up. You start off with sort of gentle wafts of cherry fruit, and you get some raspberry sherbet, and even a quite beguiling sort of wild flower, herbal element going on. And then, with time in the glass, you get much more generous red plum, more of that, even a delightful sort of effervescent cherry candy thing going on. And when we take a sip, well, we get an almost Pinot Noir-like experience where the palate is relatively lightweight and yet it's still a gloriously intense experience. So some of the elements we smelt on the nose are unsurprising. I mean, there's this glorious red sour cherry thing. There definitely is the tart, fragrant raspberry note that comes through. And then something that I didn't necessarily pick up on the nose, but on the palate is beautiful, is this kind of slow rise umami savoriness that comes through the brighter red fruit. As I mentioned earlier, the palate is quite light. The tannins are really dainty, but there is some lovely, almost like blood orange pith that gives it beautiful texture. But actually most of the structure in this wine arises from that super focused kind of sour cherry, tart, raspberry, laser-like acidity. And then the tail of the wine kind of ends off where we started out, with gentle, lingering cherry and raspberry and wild flower notes that just tail off ever so slowly. It's really quite a classy little wine. Now, if you were to have a look at this wine in the glass, it would be unsurprising to you that this is an 85% parcel of Cinsault and Grenache, because both of those cultivars are fairly light in color, and that explains what you're seeing. Added to this, a portion of that is whole bunch fermented, and the wine is generally treated really gently in the cellar. You might at this point rightly get annoyed going, what the hell does it mean to treat a wine gently? Obviously you can decide how much you punch and push and prod the grapes. It's kind of like when you make a cup of tea. Winemakers use this analogy a lot. If you put the cup in the bag and stir lots and squash the bag against the side of the cup and then stir it again and pick it up and drop it in and pick it up and drop it and stir it some more, you're going to get a big, rich, quite bitter cup of tea. And that might be what you like. And if that's so, then that's how you make tea. But if you're looking for something a little more gentle, you might choose a completely different style of tea. Anyway, you'd use loose leaf and you wouldn't stir it at all, and you'd watch the time and not leave it in the water for too long, so that you can get a gentle, lighter, but more aromatic experience. Winemaking is kind of the same. What Jasper is doing is treating the tea bag, the grapes, gently to get a lighter but still very aromatic wine. That gentle treatment may explain why the wine is so dainty, but what it doesn't explain is the intense, focused red fruit acidity that just runs through the center of this wine. Now, to explain that, we can look at the label and we'll see it says 13% alcohol. Actually, it's a 12.9% alcohol. It's a little bit lower. And then we look at the residual sugar, which is close to zero. I think it's about 1 gram or 1.2. And we can use our powers of deduction to go, well, the alcohol's moderate, and the sugar, there's nothing left in the wine, which means that probably the fruit was harvested a little bit earlier. That's why there was less sugar to convert to alcohol. So we know that this was an early harvest wine, and that explains those really vibrant red fruit notes. So as I've said, it's easy to make a dainty wine by treating it gently, and it's easy to make a wine with really pronounced acidity by harvesting a little bit earlier. But what it's not easy to do is make a dainty wine that still has intense acidity and also complex, really well-formed ripe fruit that is a mixture of sweetness and acidity all together. For that, you really have to rely on the natural aesthetic potential of the vineyard. And I guess in a sense, that's exactly what Jasper Wickens has been trying to prove with this wine all along. Okay, so that's all we have time for today, but if you have any questions about the Paardenberg or Swerwer or Jasper Wickens, then drop a comment on the site and I will try to get back to you. And if you enjoyed the video, then support us on Patreon to help us make better videos, which we then publish on the Hendrik Solo YouTube site, because there we put at least 6 videos every month, and we talk about things like wine science and wine history and unusual cultivars and rising winemaking stars like Jasper Wickens, who come out of the dynamic South African wineland.